Welcome, everybody. I'm Salvador Cordova. Welcome to Evidence and Reasons. This is a show dedicated to exploring evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. It is my policy to let both sides be aired in a civil way. It's very important that ideas are tested and examined carefully. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. My guest, my co-host, I'm honored to have my co-host here, David Neff. So the topic today, I called it the wild world of dating. And so we'll talk about, we'll compare notes about the best way to get a date. That is a date for events that happened in the deep past. And just for fun, I actually just Googled the world of dating and I got some interesting hits, just suffice to say that. So David, thank you for joining me today. And I'd like to also thank David, who suggested we have this talk. And I said, yeah, tonight's a good night to talk about it. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Sal. It's a great pleasure to be here. If you haven't seen it already, Sal and I did a stream a few weeks ago on my channel, which is youtube.com/DavidPNeff. We sat around and talked about music the entire time for about an hour and had a really good talk. So I am really looking forward to being here and having a cordial, respectful dialogue on the different dating methods. I am David Neff. I am currently a student at Harvard Community College. I was studying music, and this is my final week of classes. So there's a good chance I'll be accepted to the University of Colorado, where I'll be studying molecular and cellular and developmental biology. So far, I have definitely been accepted to the University of Maine at Augusta, Fort Kent, and Southern Maine. So I am pretty excited to start my university journey. Again, thank you, Sal, for having me here.
Thank you. Now, if you see me looking back and forth, I was hastily scrambling to try to type something in the chat somehow, unless you can, for your YouTube channel. And the funny thing is, it's YouTube's just kind of a little funny. So maybe when I can manage it, I can put it there.
Yep, I just put a link to it, youtube.com/DavidPNeff.
Oh, you were able to do that?
I'm just,
I actually can't see my own YouTube channel on this computer. I have to go to another one. So
yeah, I just have the YouTube stream in another tab. So I'm just kind of going back and forth between different tabs.
Oh, and you were able to put it. Okay, great. I will, if I forget, I'll try to remember. I want to put it in the description. So greetings. Doki is here, and Doki says, hi, Sal. Hi, David. Good to see you both. So what was the topic that you wanted to specific? I know we're talking about dating methods, and you had some specific questions, and maybe you can articulate what your views are.
Yeah, definitely. So I have just a short PowerPoint real quick to share.
Yes, I'll help you share it.
Cool. Let me pull this up. So yeah, I do want to thank Jordan from Recent Stood Out. He's become a pretty good friend of mine. He let me borrow some of his slides from the Nephilim-free debate that he had a few days ago, and he also let me borrow a couple of things from his debate that he had with Mr. Kent Hovind. So with that, let me begin. So radiometric dating is basically a method that we can use to date a sample by measuring the ratios of an unstable parent isotope to a stable daughter isotope. So basically radiometric dating, radioactive decay is basically a unstable atom stabilizing itself to a more stable atom. And it does so through a couple of different methods, such as alpha decay, beta decay, being the primary, and a couple others as well, but primarily alpha and beta. So I guess we'll start with carbon dating. So cosmic rays are constantly bombarding the atmosphere, creating nitrogen-14, and a neutron capture it and turns that into carbon-14. And so all of the living organisms eat the carbon-14 or get it from the air. And so after death, what happens is that the carbon-14 in your body is slowly decays through beta decay into nitrogen-14. Let's see here. Carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years, and carbon-14 is only useful for samples up to 50,000 years old. And it actually has several utilities in archaeology. It has been used to authenticate artifacts and disconfirm artifacts. The Great Isaiah Scroll, using carbon dating 2141 plus or minus 32 years. The Shroud of Turin, which is dated to the Middle Age, and actually Scotch. Huge problem. Here we go. Am I still good? Yeah, here we go. With fake Scotch being sold. So carbon dating has actually been used to authenticate Scotch. Next, let's talk about uranium lead dating. So while zircon is forming, it strongly rejects lead, though it does incorporate uranium. And it's definitely considered the gold standard in geochronology. You're measuring two major ratios, the ratio of uranium-238 to lead-206, which has a half-life of 4.47 billion years old, and 235 uranium to lead-207, which has a half-life of about 700 million years. And one of the ways you can tell if zircon had any lead while it was forming is by looking at lead-204, which is non-radiogenic isotope, which we can use to see if there was any lead when it was first formed. Next, rubidium strontium dating, which is another isochron dating method. We can tell by looking at the graph what sample is, whether if it was an open sample or if it was a closed sample. We can tell when it was whether or not it was completely melted or any of that. So it is an invalidate on the right hand side, and it is a great example of how we can cross-check and confirm dates. And this is why, by the way, we use multiple dating methods on a sample and not just one method. And that acts as a way of cross-checking and confirming. So what are the results? So the oldest rocks on Earth are in Western Australia, 4.4 plus or minus 0.008 billion years old. In Canada, we have about 3.9 billion years old. The oldest moon rocks were dated to 4.46 billion years, and the oldest space rocks are about 4.56 billion years. So the conclusion is the Earth is about 4.5 to 4.6 billion years old. In confirmation of this, meteor impact rate of quartz, multiple methods, different labs, the dates all agree. And so again, this is another great way of cross-checking and cross-confirming by using different methods and sending the same sample to independent labs. So what happens if there was an accelerated nuclear decay? Well, we'd all be dead. So yeah, what we can see is that there was an accelerated nuclear decay worth billions of years in just a year during the global flood. We'd be getting hundreds and hundreds of times Hiroshima in a single year, pretty much everywhere on the Earth, and that's the best case scenario because it also generates a lot of heat. So there is a significant heat problem and a radiation problem. So with that, I'll yield the mic and let's have a fun open discussion. You're on mute.
Oh, thank you very much, David. Thanks for helping me out. That would have been kind of bad if I were just talking a long time while muted. Just to give the audience, and by the way, thank you for everyone who's joining us live and also through recording. I used to accept evolution theory. I then became an old Earth creationist and then a young Earth creationist relatively recently. So most of my life I was an old Earth creationist, and many of the points that David outlined I found very forceful. and I was not willing to grant the young Earth creationists had any case unless they could argue physics. And sadly, many of them didn't have very good physics qualifications. And the people that were offering criticisms, I found the criticisms usually pretty terrible. So for the most part, I dismissed it. But there have been a few things that kind of began to change my mind. And there are anomalies that I couldn't quite resolve. The first thing that began to maybe just kind of jar my view and kind of like the old universe in general was there have been kind of quiet whispers. And when I was going both in undergrad and grad school, both among the graduate students and professors, that the mainstream viewpoints of the Big Bang were false. Now, that does have some relation to the issue of isotopes, because where we get our isotopes and all the elements, it's tied to the origin model. And there's some problems with the origin model. Then there are kind of peripheral things, not directly related to the speed of light. There were many, when I began to have my doubts about the age of the universe, there were theories that were coming out in the secular mainstream on variable speed of light and all this sort of problems that could be solved if they invoked it. So it began to get my attention. But where there were two events that began to seriously raise concern. I was looking at the methods of what they call amino acid racemization dating, and I compared it against, that's a chemical dating method. It's not very precise, but there was too high a level of residual homochiral amino acids in biological organisms, and they were not very variable across strata. That was a huge red flag. And so at that point I said, well, maybe the anomaly could be explained, but this is still an anomaly and we shouldn't just ignore it. And it began to bring thoughts about accelerated nuclear decay for the reasons that David just ably articulated. I felt the accelerated nuclear decay model was flawed. So hats off to you for pointing that out. There are heat problems. Yet on the other hand, I couldn't quite run away from this chemical anomaly. And then secondly, it just looked like the fossil record got laid down very quickly. I couldn't tell. I mean, there are definitely anomalies in that young Earth creationists have to deal with. So I began to say, okay, well, maybe let's just have a big timeout. I'm not going to try to defend one viewpoint to the exclusion of the other. Maybe we'll defend both viewpoints and just see where the evidence leads. And if we have to wait on more experimental data, we'll do that. Well, I then began to hear about the ability to change nuclear structure through chemical and electrical means. And I said, yeah, this is a game changer. This could alter the both the concentration of the radioactive isotopes and their supposed daughter elements. And I said, okay, now this is really starting to get my interest. So in graduate school, I think it was around the 2011, 2012 timeframe, I was in a solid state physics class and the professor assigned us term papers and everyone was pretty much free to try to explore something in solid state or condensed matter physics, or actually he gave us a lot of latitude. And I said, I need to kind of try to rescue my grade in this class. I better come up with, I was going to gamble on the most wild theory. And if it was good, that might rescue my grade. Thankfully, it did. My topic was electrical and chemical means of altering nuclear structure. And I said, this is a big gamble. He could just take off my head in this discussion because it was so outrageous. What I decided to do was just to look at all the mainstream literature that dealt with electrical and chemical means of altering nuclear structure. To my amazement, there was even biological means. And what I did is I went to the Hopkins library, spent a few days there. I did all sorts of internet searches and gathered peer-reviewed literature from the mainstream that was accepted and recognized. And I was like, wow, there are topics on this. They didn't make the headlines, but they're there. And I said, yeah, this is a whole new ball game, because then this could change the this could change the way we look at things, and it might resolve the chemical issues. If we find that the fossil record is young, with this alternative viewpoint of nuclear radiometric dating, it would solve the heat problem possibly, and also reconcile it with the chemical dates that I was finding. And I may show the graph of what I'm trying to explain with racemization data. Right now, it's not the best graph. So I found that that's where I was coming from. Now, I did find, I also took an astrophysics class in graduate school, and I'm going to share my screen here, because there were some people, and my professor did teach the Big Bang and kind of the standard method. And in the astrophysics class, I just remember I said, okay, I'm going to just throw in a little paragraph and talk about nucleosynthesis. One of the problems with stellar nucleosynthesis, where we get the heavy elements, what we might call the trans-uranic elements, like over here, or trans-Neptunian elements that are way out here somewhere, is that if we're just throwing things together by, say, a process of fusion, it's very hard to create elements here. And the reason you have stuff that's stable here, but then it starts to get very unstable here. And for the very heavy elements, it gets more and more unstable. And this is a known problem, unless you have things like neutron stars. And even then, they say they're able to synthesize certain of the heavy elements in the stars this way, but that's just the beginning of problems. One of the problems that was that definitely caught my attention was that uranium is 70 times more abundant on the continental shelves than on the seafloor. If uranium had an origin through a supernova, why should it have that distribution? And that's just a superficial concern, but I think it could point to something else. Jordan is here. I want to, Jordan, I am so sorry that if you're waiting a while, I was just talking away. I may not have noticed you, but welcome and thank you for joining this discussion.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, I just jumped in a couple minutes ago, so I wasn't waiting long.
Yeah. Hey, Jordan, it's good to see you. Once again, Jordan, thank you so much for coming. And I do want to thank you for letting me use part of your PowerPoint from last night, a couple nights ago. So I guess I'll start with this question, Sal. What arguments do you still find? Are there any arguments that creationists use that you still find to be uncompelling?
Many of them, starting with the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah, definitely.
I was just like, Jordan, did anyone recently use that against you?
No, but anyway, just like Dorothy, since
I overheard a rumor. I did not go to that debate, and I'm sorry. I think I was hanging out with Theophilus, and we were talking quantum mechanics.
Yeah. By the way, would you mind if I invite Leo, since you talked about astrophysics stuff?
Leo, okay, I'm going to be outnumbered, but that's fine.
Yeah, not a problem.
All right, and I want to alert my audience. Can you send them a link?
Yeah, I just
I need to take a little commercial break to explain why I'm doing this and why I have a different tenure. I have a very different tone in the way I deal with people that have different viewpoints than myself, and I'm going to explain a little bit of it. Let me see if I could find this. I'm going to share wiki, and this is on Liberty. So this website is primarily oriented to Christian creationists, homeschool parents. But I also think it's very important that the other side get aired. These children are going to go off to university. They're going to be dealing with the very same arguments that you're hearing here today. It's better that they engage and encounter it here before they go off into college. And by the way, I am kind of concerned that if people are just trying to promote creationism and they're actually not competent minimally in these fields, it's like, okay, you know, that says something to the kids. And you know, so I you know, in areas I'm not competent in, I'm happy to invite other people to talk about it. So this is not going to be a screaming match, and I'm not going to be trying to cut people off. And one thing professionally, if I don't know something or I'm not 100% sure, I feel an obligation to point it out. That's a totally responsible thing to do.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, there's a segment. It's like we want to just convert people, lead them to Jesus, and we'll just rush to the best art. You know, we'll grab the first argument we can get. And and that did more to keep me from becoming a young Earth creationist.
Yeah, and if I could say, I know Standing for Truth this year, he can confirm in my own debates with Standing for Truth, there's been many times he threw something at me and I said, I don't know. I want to take some more time to research. And I think that is the most intellectually honest way of dealing with questions you don't know. Just at least have the courage to say, I don't know, therefore I want to actually find this out. And I know Jordan, in his debate with Neff and Salvador, kept saying, look, I'm not a geologist, this is not my field. And that's a good thing. One of the reasons why I left Christianity and young Earth creationism was how dishonest many of them, Kent Hovind, I'm talking to you specifically, are. And I've seen some dishonesty from people like Andrew Snelling and some of the others, and when they're deliberately quote mining and misrepresenting their sources and misrepresenting the science. I'm sitting there reading their material, and even I can destroy half of those arguments. And it's like, if this is the best they've got, really? So
okay.
So
all right. So I'm going to share something from. Now, I may not. Oh, by the way, the views expressed here are not necessarily those of Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith, but I feel it's important to air it. So I'm not, you know, just the fact they may not challenge you on some of these things doesn't mean I approve or disapprove. So it's great, but that's neither here nor there. Whether, I mean, to me personally, whether someone is lied or is dishonest or whatever, that is not my concern here. My concern, welcome Leophilus. My concern is to look at the data.
Leophilius. You got to get that second I in there.
Okay.
Welcome. So let me share my screen, and I'm gonna tell people how I do business, and they may not like it, but this is the way I do it. This is by an atheist, John Stuart Mill, and it echoes the way I feel important to do business. This is from his essay on liberty. First, if any opinion is compelled to silence, that opinion may, for aught we can certainly know, be true. To deny this is to assume our own infallibility. Secondly, though the silenced opinion be an error, it may, and very commonly does, contain a portion of truth. And since the general or prevailing opinion on any subject is rarely or never the whole truth, it is only by the collision of adverse opinions that the remainder of the truth has any chance of being supplied. Thirdly, even if the received opinion be not only true, but the whole truth, unless it is suffered to be and actually is vigorously and earnestly contested, it will, by most of those who receive it, be held in a manner of a prejudice, with little comprehension or feeling of its rational grounds. And not only this, but fourthly, the meaning of the doctrine itself will be in danger of being lost or enfeebled or deprived of its vital effect on the character and conduct. The dogma becoming a mere formal profession, inefficacious for good, but cumbering the ground and preventing the growth of any real and heartfelt conviction from reason or personal experience. And so the way we get more convinced of something is to test it. When I was working as a scientist and engineer in the aviation industry, the way we got confidence in an idea was not to have it preached at us that this was a good product. The way we found out it was a good product was to subject it to harsh tests to see if it would stand. And if it stood the test, then we had more confidence. And that's what we're doing here today. Yeah. So that's why I welcome this discussion. And if I'm wrong, and I was in the aviation industry, if you design something wrong, you value it when someone criticizes you and finds that you're wrong, because someone could die.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the mentality that I've adopted. And I feel the same way about teaching kids. I know that when I make mistakes, it bothers me that I said, I look back at my lecture, I said, yeah, I made a little error there. Maybe it was just a little algebra mistake, or I stated something incorrectly. I said that I hope, I'll do my best to make sure that I tell them, hey guys, I said something that was a little off. I had an interview recently, and I said a few things, and I'm reviewing the interview. I said, I got some of the facts wrong. Someone's echoing here. Is it me? Can't be me. Anyway.
I think it is, because the rest of us have a headset on.
I know. See, it's called that pigeonhole. So let me see if I can.
Do you have the YouTube playing back or something?
Hang on, audience.
That's a little weird. I've never seen somebody echo themselves. That's really weird.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for joining. Leo, Jordan, always good to see you guys. And
yeah, I only heard one thing on astrophysics that's not correct, and that was that uranium comes from supernova nucleosynthesis. It doesn't.
I don't know if I'm still echoing.
Neutron star nucleosynthesis. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So, Leo, I guess when you repeat that about uranium coming from,
uranium doesn't come from supernovae. It comes from the collision and merger of neutron stars. Most supernovae can create elements heavier than iron, but it's not very much. I think like maybe lead would be the highest one, and even that's in very, very trace amounts. Most elements heavier than iron are produced in neutron star nucleosynthesis, when neutron stars collide and merge.
Yep, that's the current model. Okay, I think we sort of figured out where the echo was. So I was saying that even just yesterday when I was on Christian Apologist, I got the date of publication of a book wrong just by 2 years. I said I needed to fix that. Just my conscience would bother me. So we all make mistakes, and I try to qualify things when I'm wrong about something. So
and I have great respect for you for that. I really admire you for that approach. So thank you.
By the way, David, it is you echoing. I don't know why. That's weird. I don't know if maybe you're using a different mic than the one that's on your headset. That's really weird. I've never heard you echo before.
Let me try this. Am I still echoing? Let's try this. Oh, there we go. Now I think.
Well, let me say something.
Test.
Yeah,
test,
I think it's good. I'm not hearing anything anymore.
Test.
Yeah, it's good. I don't hear any more echo, so I think you fixed it.
Okay, good. Can you hear me all right though?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So for those who joined us late, is it okay, David, if I just recap a little bit just to update everyone? What I was saying, I was in elementary school. I was taught evolution. I accepted it. Became a Christian. I still accepted evolution for like a year or so. Then I became an old Earth creationist for most of my life, say at least 30 years. And many of the things that David articulated in his opening comments, I thought were many of the reasons I rejected young Earth creationism. And I thought they were those are very well reasoned. And I thought the attacks on radiometric dating for like in the early 2000s, I thought were not very convincing. And I said, maybe they're anomalies, but I really need, trying to just find anomalies is not enough. You don't build your own house by burning other people's houses down, so to speak. And there had to be an alternative physical model to explain the distribution of radioisotopes and their daughter elements. Just trying to look up experimental anomalies here and there just wasn't cutting it. Now, I did find some of the things with some of the evidence is there. Yeah, some anomalies just wouldn't quite go away. So fast forward, let me see if I have this diagram here. There were a number of things, first beginning with the Big Bang model, both in undergrad and graduate school. There were kind of whispers that the Big Bang had serious problems, including from my own professors and fellow graduate students. So I was like, well, what else could there be if there are issues like this? So, I mean, my curiosity was being sparked. And then let me show you a graph that I did. This was, let me see if I could share it here. This was on amino acid racemization dating. And I was just kind of doing this, again, for like a lot of things. I have a mind that's curious about a lot of things, and maybe it's not going to lead anywhere. But I saw this graph here, and I began debating it on the internet. And I knew enough about differential equations. I said, yeah, this is bothersome to me. Let me explain. This is not a very good graph, first off. I need to rework it. The fundamental problem is if radiometric dating is accurate, we should see, you see how this bar is slanted down? It should be horizontal. And it's going to take like an hour to, yeah, okay. The predicted line is like this. If the chemical and radiometric dates were aligning, we get a line like this. Instead, it looks like this. So this is going to take a long time to uncoil. So I'm not advertising or representing this as a slam dunk proof of young Earth. That's not the point. I'm just sharing with you all why I began to be skeptical, even though, I still thought radiometric dating was reasonably good. I said this began to kind of just spark my interest. And so this was a totally different angle than anything in young Earth creationism, because most of the time I did not like reading what I was reading at AIG or CMI. I'm really not trying to disrespect those organizations, but again, I'm looking through the lens of an old Earth creationist. It's like I'm basically on your team, guys, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing that with, if I don't feel comfortable sharing it with my students in a science class, I might do so with some caveats, then, it's just not, I wouldn't share it in church. But anyway, that caught my attention. And then I was sharing earlier, for those who joined us with David, that I had an astrophysics class, and I raised the issue of nucleosynthesis, and that it's not just the creationists who are concerned with nucleosynthesis models. There were people like Adamenko who were suggesting that it could be a process involving electricity. And I threw that out there in a term paper. My professor, who used to be Richard Dawkins' drinking pal in Oxford, he didn't take my head off. And honest truth, I thank God for my atheist professors like this gentleman. I wouldn't have made it through grad school without him. So thank you. And I still pray for him. Then fast forward to maybe about the next semester or a few semesters later in grad school, I was taking a solid state physics class. I had to rescue my grade in there because I didn't get along too well with the way the professor taught. I got well along with him personally, but the way he taught just didn't work for me. And I said, I'm going to take a gamble. I'm going to just take an outrageous topic, one that's of interest to me personally. And if I do a good job, maybe I'll rescue my grade. Thank God I did. But my topic was chemical and electrical means of changing nuclear structure. And David did point out the problem of accelerated decay, and that bothered me. And I think that's a legitimate concern. I don't argue for that sort of accelerated decay that's going to incinerate the Earth. I thought that was legitimate. So I said, how am I going to pull this off? I'm certainly not going to cite anything from CMI or any of the creationist organizations, but I had some thought I could pull this off. So I spent a couple days at the university library looking all this up, and I was shocked. There were a lot of things in the literature where they had experiments that at low temperature or that suggested nuclear transmutation. And what's exciting now is in 2018, they've been able to effect nuclear transmutation with both chemical and electrical means. And that is very exciting. So why don't people hear me talking more about radiometric dating? I'm awaiting to see more developments in the area of electrically induced and chemically induced nuclear transmutation under the supposed extreme conditions of all the things happening on planet Earth that could happen in a flood scenario, which to me is no more outrageous than supposing the moon got created by a collision with some big, Mars-sized planet, and then it just spun off. I mean, every theory of origins at this point seems equally outrageous. The young Earth creation model is no more outrageous than anything I've read personally. That's my personal assessment. You all may not agree, but under those extreme conditions, if the piezoelectric effect is creating enough electricity, that might do it. And so I'm not saying that this has solved it, but I'm interested, and I'm waiting to see experimental evidence. And also, personally, I need to relearn the physics I supposedly learned, and I need to learn new physics. I haven't had a lot of background in nuclear. So that kind of is in some where I'm at. Professionally, this graph that I showed regarding the racemization dating, Might I
ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Is there any way you could link to that graph in either put the link to it in the video description or link it in the YouTube side chat? James Downard requested a link for it, either in the description or in the YouTube side chat.
Okay, I'll show where it came from. And Leophilus, if you want to talk a little bit, or any of so you're all now co-hosts here, gentlemen.
Yep. And
I'll need a few minutes to be able to honor James' request, and that's a great request.
By the way, you can just call me Leo. You don't have to say my full name every time.
Okay.
Yeah. By the way, I think I think it's worth pointing out that even if every single dating method we have, radiometric dating, thermonuclearensis dating, spin capture, et cetera, if all those dating methods were shown to be foundationally flawed, that they could not be trusted, it still would not prove a young Earth. You can't say radiometric dating doesn't work, therefore young Earth. What you would have to say is we do not know how old the Earth is, that there is no reliable way to get an accurate age. It could be older than 4.6 billion years, or it could be younger, but disproving every single radiometric dating method does not automatically jump to young Earth creationism being true.
Another thing about radioactive decay in general is, for anybody that honestly wishes to claim that it's not accurate, I await their publishing of their papers and the receival of their Nobel Prize in Physics, because you will have shown that the fine structure constant, which I think it was last week, we just showed again that it is a constant. That would not be constant if nuclear decay rates changed. The Dirac coupling constant of electroweak theory would not be constant. Even constants governing strong interactions would not be constant. To show that radioactive decay is not constant would literally append almost all of modern, not just nuclear physics, but particle physics. I don't think anybody has done that. And anybody that feels they can, please, by all means, claim your Nobel Prize.
Yeah, and also, to piggyback off that, if radioactive decay could somehow be sped up or slowed down, none of our technology would work, such as our atomic clocks, nuclear power plants, none of that would actually work if the decay rate was not constant.
Nuclear bombs wouldn't work either. We wouldn't have been able to drop nuclear bombs on the two cities we did in Japan.
I'm not. Well, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine what the effect of a changing, because the physics would be so dramatically different whether or not nuclear power plants would work. It would certainly, if the decay rates were changing all over the place, it'd be a lot harder to manage decay heat. There is interestingly one type of radioactive decay that is sensitive to a certain extent to environmental pressures that's relevant for argon-argon dating, because electron capture is actually sensitive to a certain extent. It's not much, but for those who don't know, the way that works is basically the closest electron to the nucleus is captured, hence electron capture, and it turns a proton into a neutron and releases a neutrino. And so
a positron and it's either a positron and an electron neutrino or an electron antineutrino. I think it's an electron neutrino because the positron would be the antiparticle of the electron.
So
okay. I need to weigh on something here. Oh, go please, gentlemen. Just go in turn. I'm sorry.
That's all I say. That is that's often presented. Most of the time, when you hear someone presenting data on a changing radioactive decay method, that's the method they're talking about, and there can be changes to that one because of the peculiar. It's the way that the pathway that electron capture uses is very different than, say, alpha decay or some other kind of decay.
Yes.
So what applies to one doesn't necessarily apply to the other. That's all.
Yeah, and also another way that we can be confident that the decay rate has always been constant is, as Jordan pointed out in his debate, and even Dr. Dan, we were chatting a few days ago, was due to the Oklo natural nuclear reactor, which is 100% proof that the nuclear decay has been constant for at least the past 2 billion years.
I did want to say the only other method that we can utilize to slow down nuclear decay is through time dilation. And you're not actually slowing down nuclear decay itself in such a scenario, so it still isn't really slowing down nuclear decay in the literal sense.
Well, slowing down.
I'd like to weigh in. Please speak your heart and conscience, and I do have something to say.
Go ahead. It's your channel.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'm going to ask this for everyone because I think this is a question everyone should answer. But I was talking to Sal in email. I asked, what evidence would compel you to change your mind on this particular topic? So Sal, I guess I'll start with you. Is there any particular lines of evidence that would compel you to go back to like an old Earth creationism or whatever?
I haven't thought about it. That's a good question, but I had something I wanted to weigh in with what Leo said.
Sure.
The change, altering nuclear structure, we can alter nuclear structure and without changing radioactive decay rates. That's what an atomic bomb does. Mm-hmm. That's what an atomic bomb does. So if the origin of isotopes and their daughter product might have a different explanation, the proportions, rather than radioactive decay, then that one doesn't have to violate anything. And I'm going to, in the process of this, by the way, thank you guys for talking a little bit. So I'm not representing that I agree with other creationists that this is a big, that this is a big solution of accelerated decay.
So
there may be some components of it. So that's
I've never heard of this racemization thing.
Yeah, neither have I.
So if you go ahead and explain what that is.
So, but this is kind of more of an anomaly. The more important thing, like I said, one doesn't build one's own house by burning someone else down. This is just showing a disparity. So just take it for what it's worth. And we can have a discussion on this, but there are also oxidation things. So the interest of me as a student of physics, and I wanted to show this. And David, please hold your thought. I'm not trying to dodge it. I'm trying to do multiple things at a time because you did ask me what would change my mind. And maybe I don't have a good answer at this time. And it's fair you call me out on it. But as a student of physics, I'm very interested in, I actually was thinking about getting my PhD in physics at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, because it was they were friendly to this whole thing of nuclear transmutation. And I wanted to say when by the way, my professor, and I'm going to show something here in a little bit, my professor was just thrilled when I gave my presentation on chemically induced changes in nuclear structure through chemical and electrical means. He told the whole class that's the topic of the night. And all I did was take secular papers that showed all these things of how nuclear structure can be changed by chemical and electrical means at various temperatures. But the thing that I'd like to point out, and we're talking about Nobel Prizes, I'm going to point this out in the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which I used to be a member of. I just didn't want to be, I didn't want to be paying dues. It says here, November 28, 2018, scientists in the US and Japan get serious about low energy nuclear reactions. It's absolutely, definitely, seriously not cold fusion. And here is some of these things. It's called violent chemistry. Craters on the surface on a chunk of palladium may have resulted from low energy nuclear reactions. And there are serious amounts of money being thrown at this. I will put this in the chat. What they have not been able to do is to get a nuclear transmutation reaction where you get more energy coming out of the reaction than you put in. But still, so obviously they're wanting to be able to create nuclear energy through a different means. And they talk about the whole history, kind of the stuff with cold fusion and kind of the debacle of the difficulty of reproducing it. But then they were able, chemists had persisted in this, and let me see if they have it. They had stuff. Here it is. In June, scientists at several Japanese research institutes published a paper in the International Journal of Hydrogen Energy, in which they recorded excess heat after exposing metal nanoparticles to hydrogen gas. The results are the strongest in a long line of low-energy nuclear reaction studies from Japanese institutions like Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. And the issue here is not, unfortunately, from my interest standpoint, they're focusing so much on this renewable energy. And I wanted to be involved in renewable energy because I cared for the environment. I didn't like all the fossil fuels burning up and polluting. I just, I felt it'd be just a great thing to have renewable energy. So I was interested in this from that standpoint. But then there's a side benefit. We're starting to see ways of electrically and chemically altering nuclear structure. And these are some very serious nuclear chemists. So am I making a point here? I'm just saying my point is maybe we need to just have a timeout, both sides, and say, maybe just let the scientific method move forward.
All right,
Jordan?
sure. So,
So those, I'm not super active on YouTube, so people might not know who I am. I'm a nuclear engineer. That's I only have an undergrad. I'm not a nuclear physicist. And I'm not a radiogeologist. So there's my disclaimers.
Great. We need to talk. We need to hang out, bud. Because, all right, I'll tell you what. I don't have a lot of nuclear background. My physics program was just on the 5 pillars of physics. That would be classical mechanics, quantum mechanics, statistical mechanics, thermodynamics, relativity, electromagnetism. No nuclear. I was so bummed.
My physics went through modern physics, so we dabbled a little bit in quantum mechanics and special relativity. Didn't go super deep in general relativity, so I'm by no means a physicist either.
You're lucky.
Yeah. I considered doing a double major, but then I was like, it'd take me another 2 years. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, as it pertains to radiometric dating, if I understand what you're saying right, what you're saying is that we could have transmutations or disintegrations or whatever with the parent or daughter due to non-radioactive decay, and that would mess with the clock, and that could, if that happened, that would undermine the underlying assumptions of radiometric dating methods. Is that an accurate summation?
Yeah, it could. I'm not saying it did. So
Right.
I'm going to be more subtle. I say it's of interest to me. It's also interesting physics. What would be more convincing is if we could do more of this in the lab. And I said, a very simple experiment. Let's try to hypothesize what the conditions are that would induce this. We may not have the power to do it, but let's just say hypothetically, could we make a rock that has the characteristics of all the dating? That would really do it for me. And so the reason that I haven't weighed into this discussion, it's like, well, you know, even though I have my own very strong biases, as you could tell, there is an experiment that could help us, and that experiment needs to be carried out, and then we'll have a case. Right now, it's a little too tentative for my taste. But the other thing is, I meet gentlemen like Jordan here who have nuclear background, and even though I have a physics degree, I didn't have nuclear background, and I'm like, okay, you know, I don't feel comfortable talking about these very difficult issues without having any nuclear background.
Yeah, I mean, it's super important to understand your limitations. That human knowledge is so vast that to become an expert requires like a very small focus. You know, so I'm not an expert. I don't even consider myself an expert in nuclear engineering, to be completely honest, because I've met people who know so much more than me. You know, but I agree that it's worth looking into, and it's again, not being a radiogeologist, I could imagine that could contribute to some sources of error potentially. I'd be very skeptical that it would seriously put into doubt radiometric dating as a method, though. The reason is there's a couple of reasons. First of all, the radioisotopes that radiometric dating relies on are different for every method. So you've got uranium-lead dating, which obviously does uranium isotopes transmuting into lead. You've got argon-argon dating. You've got carbon-14 for very young things. You've got rubidium-strontium. You've got all these different isotopes. And so even when they're dated in similar rocks, so like I did in my presentation, the Manson meteorite crater, it wasn't just uranium-lead dating that came to these consistent ages. You had rubidium, strontium, and other types of dating, and they all told a consistent story. And we see that kind of data pattern broadly. So I think it would be plausible, at least, that if this kind of these decay or disintegrations or whatever, these transmutations, were being caused by a process other than radioactivity, that you'd expect it to affect argon differently than rubidium, differently than uranium, differently than lead, differently than et cetera. And also that it wouldn't be consistent from like this site of rubidium, strontium, lead, et cetera, and that site. It would be remarkable to me if they all were subject to the exact same influences, even under like a worldwide flood scenario, since it's very chaotic. And so I would expect you'd have a situation where instead of all these different dating methods with different assumptions coming to a consistent picture, you'd have, and obviously it's never perfectly consistent because no method of any type is going to be perfect. But I would guess that you'd have less agreement than we currently have. That would be one thing.
Right.
I do have. I want to. I have. That's a very good point, and I'm going to share something about that. Did someone else have something to say while I try to?
Yeah.
Try to get. Okay. Leo and David, or we'll just flip a coin sometime because I want to be fair. Okay, Leo first.
So the first thing, it seemed to me that you were making an argument that we know that nuclear transmutation can happen and that it can happen by means other than radioactive decay. And then we're kind of segueing into what has often been called cold fusion, that's now referred to as low energy nuclear reactions, as something that might have caused these isotopes to change into different isotopes other than radioactive decay, thereby avoiding this sort of the problems that that accelerated decay has, because all it has is problems. So first off, nuclear transmutation is just where you can change what an isotope of an atom is through nuclear fusion, nuclear fission, or through radioactive decay, but that's that, you know, they're just not like outside things affecting it, like in the case of fission or fusion. And the thing with low energy nuclear reactions is there isn't any solid data that it's happened yet, that we've been capable of doing it. I think the original papers that were published on it, was that in the 1980s, I believe, the late 80s or something. I don't know if any of that was really conclusively verified. I don't think it's necessarily that LENR, or low energy nuclear reactions, is like completely impossible. It's just that we don't have any, at least currently, viable mechanisms for how it would occur. So that's all I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you. And David?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jordan. If that were to happen, we wouldn't expect a consistency amongst the different dating methods. And again, that's why we use different dating methods for the same sample, to make sure there is no contamination and to make sure there's no transmutation of certain isotopes or whatever. But I think the bigger issue here is that we have taken samples of known ages and have gotten the correct results, such as argon from Mount Vesuvius and several others. And we use, of course, carbon-14 dating all the time in archaeology and for the Dead Sea Scrolls, as I mentioned in my opening. So I just, if this all came down as a result of the global flood or accelerated nuclear decay or any of that, we should be seeing the same ages throughout the geological column. We shouldn't have the bottom layer being a consistent, so much older than the middle layer and so forth and so forth. We should have the same exact age throughout the entire column.
If I may segue into something, a point that kind of alludes to something that David was saying, is that we've utilized different forms of radiometric dating to date things we already have a pretty accurate age on, because of like what was talked about in history, or finding things in the geologic column and dating it that way, and then radiometrically dating what's in those columns and the ages match up. It seems to me that if radiometric dating were in any way inefficient or insufficient, it wouldn't have the extremely accurate results that are corroborated from things outside of it. I can't imagine that it would be so strongly corroborated if there were inconsistencies with it.
So this leads, and this is actually all three gentlemen here, the point I wanted to raise, and I'm going to try to give a balanced viewpoint here. I was at the Origins 2012 meeting in Purcellville, Virginia, and it had the speakers Kurt Wise, Andrew Snelling, Todd Wood, Steve Austin, obviously creationists.
Stone cold. I'm sorry, I had to.
And I actually got some a surprisingly candid meeting, and I wish they had a recording of it. Andrew Snelling was sharing they took some rocks and then they had it radiometrically dated, and the various methods, and they didn't agree. But I looked at the results. I said, well, I wanted to say, Andrew, they're not that far off. Okay, maybe they don't agree by several billion years. And everyone just, I just wanted to hear what they had to say. And I wish that my memory would serve me better. So if I get the details wrong, it's just, I'm having a Joe Biden moment here and I can't remember quite everything. But someone, or even Andrew Snelling himself said, or someone raised it, he said, we still have a problem explaining why it's that close. And I wanted to say,
they were honest.
That was, I just why don't I see that in more creationist websites? Okay, among the researchers, you have to admit it because everyone knows what the score is. I said that was an honest moment. I wanted to say, why are they all so similar? At that point, I just as a
one of the reasons,
at that point, I said, okay, regardless of what people may think of their honesty, I felt more comfortable when they would just make that honest admission and say, this is troubling and it's a problem we have to solve. I said, I can deal with you guys. If you say this is a problem we need to solve, then you're being honest with the data we have in hand. Because what would bother me is that some of these creationist advocates are saying this is not a problem to solve. And it's like, no, that's not what I heard. I was at this meeting and I heard that the top guys talking about this, and everyone in that room said, yes, this is a problem that needs to be solved. So it was also around that time, maybe a year before, that I did my study on nuclear decay. Now, Brian Nickel has created the videos, and Standing for Truth aired some of his work. I've always been impressed with it, and I've shown the video to someone who's studying nuclear engineering in graduate school. He's in my private apologetics group, and both of us agreed that it'd be great to just learn more. And I told him, I said, I need to learn more of this. So, I still don't. I'm not saying that we have an answer, but I wouldn't say that the dates line up that accurately. Now, there's one other data point for some of those who joined us late, it does bother me that there's 70 times more uranium on the continental shelves than there is in the seafloor. If the isotopes had stellar origin, or all the variety of things with neutron stars or whatever mixing, I don't see why there should be a concentration of 70 times more uranium on the continental shelves than on the seafloor. To me, that suggests that there might have been some geological cataclysm that might have created enough electricity to create the proportions of isotopes that we see. What would convince me? We need an experiment that'll make a rock that has those proportions. Then I'll be persuaded. At this point, it's just speculation.
If it,
Jordan first, and then David, is that all right with you? Or why don't you guys fight over it?
So again, not a geologist, so I have no idea if there is that kind of disparity, or if there is, why there would be. If you had a non-uniform source for the uranium, like say some of the uranium came from neutron star synthesis, but other uranium was produced from whatever exotic physics you want to name, I'd be curious why. Like, what would be the forcing mechanism that would make that new uranium have the same enrichment as neutron star uranium? So uranium across the entire world is pretty consistently 0.7% enriched. It's like 0.6 something. I forget the exact number, but it's pretty close for all sources. Trust me, if we had a source of uranium that was already enriched, we'd be digging that, not the other stuff. So So I'd be curious if there was a physical model that created the uranium some other way, it would also have to explain why this other created uranium had the same proportions of U-235, U-238, and U-233.
Yes. And I think everything that you said, these are things that need to be solved by the young Earth model. So I'm not disputing that. By the way, I was lucky enough, and thank you for talking. And then David, you're next. I'm sorry, I'll try to call you David. I keep calling you Neff because of Nephilim free. And I'm not trying to just call you by your last name because I'm being rude. It's just I keep thinking Neff and Neff and Neff and Neff.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I did find a source from the World Nuclear Association, just for those who cosmic origins of uranium, and they're talking about, they give an alternate explanation, and one is free to agree or disagree, but it talked about here that let me see, the number 70. This represents a 70-fold enrichment compared with the primitive mantle. So, in fact, the uranium lost from the depleted oceanic mantle is mostly sequestered in the continental crust. So I was just, this is where I was getting the number 70. And that does kind of, that really does stand out to me, that there's a disparity. And the creationist sources may interpret it differently, but I just wanted to, just for the sake of completeness, say that I didn't pull that number out of the air. And I talked to an old Earth creationist, Casey Luskin, and we were just having a conversation about this. He said, yeah, that is an anomaly. And he was a geology student before he did biology and law. David, please.
Sure. So just wanted to go back to accelerated nuclear decay real quick. There is one humongous fatal flaw to accelerated nuclear decay, and that flaw is that if accelerated nuclear decay happened on Earth during the global flood, then space rocks, etc., that were outside the Earth should not be affected by the accelerated nuclear decay. So if the Earth was 6,000 years old and there has been undergoing billions of years worth of nuclear decay on Earth, then when we radiometric date like meteorites, moon rocks, and stuff like that, we should get about 6,000 years. As it turns out, one of the reasons why we use meteorites in space rocks is because they are less susceptible to contamination. And what we find is that there is a consistency of billions of years within the meteorites and space rocks that we've dated, but it gets worse. Dr. Andrew Snelling himself wrote a series of papers, I think 6 or 7 papers in total, and the answers in
Bush light?
What was that?
I shouldn't have said that out loud. I was asking
Okay.
George. It looked like
Yeah,
a Bush light.
he said, I think he published like, I know it had to be like at least 4 or 5 papers, maybe more, and he examined these meteorites, and he himself stated that there is no evidence of accelerated nuclear decay in the meteorites that he examined.
So I just have to say real quick, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, the capital of craft beer. And so this is a Wheels Goes Round Goza
It's better
from
than
a
Bush Light.
microbrewery. It's not Bush Light.
Yeah, it's better than Bush Light.
I am offended that you would put that on me.
I just saw the light blue and I'm like, is that a Bush Light? But there are a couple things I wanted to say. The first one was when Sal asked, I don't understand why some of these creationist organizations aren't more honest. Well, if they were more honest, then they'd have to openly admit that there are significantly more problems that are actually problems for their model. And then at that point, there would be so many problems in their model that applying Occam's razor, the fact that the Earth is old, has been here for roughly 4.5 billion years, and that evolutionary processes have taken place biologically on the planet would become the better model. Not that it already isn't, but that's the reason why. Secondly, I did want to go back.
If I can I go after you? Please finish your thought.
Yeah, I did want to go back whenever we get a chance to David Neff's question that he wanted to ask to all of us about what would change our minds, just because I think it's an interesting question. It's one worth answering.
Yeah,
okay, so I guess I had a David, if it's okay, I'd like to share this here.
Sure, go right ahead.
And to Leo's point about creationists being a little more forthright, I wouldn't call them dishonest. I wish they were more forthright. I know I'm going to offend you guys now, but I'll just say it. I thought the evolution industry, the abiogenesis industry, the Big Bang industry they're far more guilty. And that's why I'm happy to side with creationists, because what I have dealt with as an evolutionary biologist, I'm sick of it. I've submitted manuscripts to editors. They said, your conclusions are right, but we're not publishing. And I said, yeah, I'm fed up. I'm fed up. You guys, I wanted to thank them for being honest enough to tell me that. One editor of a journal, thank God, he publicly said Salvador's conclusions are correct. And I had the links to that. But he said, yeah, there's some problems in publishing your paper. And my point was, it's not about me or what I have to say. It's the fact that the conclusion's right. Let someone else write the paper and have that conclusion and have it published. Why isn't anyone calling this out? And so if I may complain about creationism, I have way more issues with the mainstream as far as evolutionary biology. I've had firsthand experience. It was very distasteful. So sorry, that's me on my soapbox. But I want to point out this with the meteorites and other things. Something that struck me, a professor at my school, Robert Hazen, my undergrad was George Mason. My grad was Johns Hopkins. In his book, The Scientific Quest for Life's Origins, he's an old Earth guy, and he's definitely not a creationist or ID proponent. There's somewhere in his book where he talked about finding bacteria inside these meteorites. And I'm just like, you got to be kidding. And he was saying, yeah, it's amazing how these meteorites have metabolic processes that can slow down for 4 billion years. And that kind of just like really caught me. So the possibility is that these meteorites may have come from Earth, and that's not the first time that I've been hearing there's
So,
Earth-like bacteria in these meteorites. So
if I could respond
the
real quick.
hydroplate model suggests that, and I know a lot of people, even creationists, don't like the hydroplate model, but that may be one solution. And I found that data point compelling. This was Robert Hazen as mainstream gets.
Yeah. So if I could respond to that,
Please.
the problem that I see here is that in order to believe that, and I know Standing for Truth used that as a rescue device in my discussion debate with him. He the problem here is severalfold. Number one is the insane amount of energy that would be needed to get everything. Like, we have dated even the surface of Mars. So what you have to do is accelerate enough of the material to get to space, then rain back down on Earth, and then get to both the moon and get to Mars. We, of course, we have moon samples from moon rocks from when we walked on the moon. They have to have been mistaken for moon rocks when they really came from Earth. So the whole premise that every single asteroid that we dated were really Earth rocks just violates Occam's razor.
Not only that, but we know that many objects just don't come from the Earth. Their composition, while having similar elements in it, is not the same as the Earth. The moon, however, is quite similar, and that is because the reason we have the moon is because a Mars-like object struck planet Earth about 4 billion years ago.
Yeah, so real quick.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah,
please,
yeah, sure. I'm going to kind of address that and also address what Standing for Truth said. He said in the comments that it's not a rescue device because it's empirical evidence that they were from the Earth. I would love to know what evidence that is. If I could share something real quick.
Please, I'll try to put it up there.
Yeah, sure. Need this up.
I would also be interested in seeing some papers published on us finding life on asteroids. I feel like that would have made much more noise in the community than it has, because I haven't heard anything about that.
Sure, yeah. So first rock dating experiment performed on Mars. Here's what happened. Many of the experiments carried out on the vessel mentioned. This paper is one of 6 appearing in the journal that reports results from analysis of data and observations of the Curiosity. In March, Curiosity drilled holes in the mudstone and collected powdered rock samples from the 2 locations about 3 meters apart. Once the rock samples were drilled, Curiosity's robotic arm delivered the rock powder to the SAM instrument, where it was used for a variety of chemical analysis, including geochronology or rock dating techniques. One technique, the potassium argon technique, determines the age of a rock by measuring how much argon gas it contains. It was about 3.86 to 4.56 billion years old. And in one sense, this is an utterly unsurprising result. It's the number that everyone expected. And I'm going to emphasize this. What was surprising was that our results from a technique that was implemented on Mars while a little planning on Earth got a number that is exactly what crater counting predicted. MSL instruments weren't designed for this purpose, and we weren't sure if the experiment was going to work. But the fact that our numbers is consistent with previous estimates suggested that the technique worked, and it worked quite well. So there were 2 independent techniques. One was the potassium argon method, and then the other was the crater counting method. And both aligned and got the same exact results. But again, the bigger problem here is with Standing for Truth model and appealing to the accelerated nuclear decay, is that there is no evidence of accelerated nuclear decay in the meteorites that Dr. Andrew Stelling examined. So with that, I'm going to yield the mic.
If I wanted to say this, there's not unity on the accelerated nuclear decay model. First off, there are multiple accelerated nuclear decay models floating around in the yuck community. And I don't subscribe to some of them. I challenged Eugene Chafin. By the way, I totally respect Eugene Chafin. He is a nuclear physicist. I was at the International Conference on Creationism held in Pittsburgh 2013. And he was talking about a nuclear decay model. And I say, I put my hat in hand there, because I totally respect him. I said, all right, if we have an isotropic nuclear decay model, how would that affect nuclear processes in the sun? And he's like, that's a really good question. Everyone's saying that's a really good question. If you're going to invoke these accelerated nuclear decay models in terms of affecting other physical processes, what do you expect? Are the stars going to blow up? I mean, I didn't point that out, but I think he totally got it. And to his credit, he said, then, if there's a problem here, my model's just totally gone.
Right.
I totally respected him for saying that. He did find anomalies in some really obscure element that I'm not familiar with, but every now and then I'll run into someone I totally respect when they say I could be totally wrong. And so where was I headed with that? So you're talking about nuclear decay. There is some nuclear decay in the hydroplate model, but it's a different kind than the one that Russell Humphreys invokes. And he was using white hole cosmology to solve the heating problem. And I was just like, oh boy. And everyone was like, this is really bad. I was in front of all these creationists and I said, Dr. Humphreys, what about the heating problem? He said, did you read the white hole cosmology? Everyone laughed at me. Like, yeah, okay, creationists laughing at me, creationist. And, there are other creationists that don't believe the white hole cosmology solution. So, if you're hammering at the accelerated nuclear decay, you actually have my sympathy on that.
Yeah,
and I will say something that maybe needs to be said, and people are not going to like me for saying this, but there are rival creationist organizations with their own viewpoints. And if you saw some of the screaming that happened in International Conference of Creation 2008, we still have recordings of it where some of these guys were screaming and turning red at each other and just like, guys, we're supposed to be on the same team here. But it was kind of like disconcerting. And so someone asked in Standing for Truth's airing of Bob Enyart and Brian Nickel, I didn't get to see it, the whole thing. Sorry about that, Standing, but great for you showing them. Creationists have been suppressing each other's viewpoints, and they have their old pet theories. There are 12 creationist cosmologies, and not all of them can be right as a matter of principle. And they're all kind of just destroying each other. So I'm actually with you about pointing out what you pointed out about accelerated nuclear decay. Thank you. That's something we need to file away. We need to, if it really dispenses with one of the YEC models of accelerated decay, better we do it now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So let me ask you a question. If we were able to find a sample or whatever that we can both agree had no daughter isotope when it was formed, and we could take that ratio, and when you say that would be very positive evidence of an old Earth?
At this point, I don't know enough. Okay. And this is why I'm having you gentlemen here, and I respect your opinions and your study of this. And, I obviously have my own biases.
Of course.
What still troubles me is the facts of astrophysics and the faint young sun paradox. The Earth could have been, it's an acknowledged thing in the secular literature that the sun was 30% not as bright as it is today. The Earth would have been an ice ball through the Cambrian. There wouldn't be a fossil record. That was, again, the beginning of doubts. So it's not like, what I'll say is each side's trying to say, all the facts definitely 100%, and another side, all the facts 100% this model. Yeah, I have my biases, but I'm more willing to say, each model has problems at this point. And
by the way, real quick, Standing for Truth said in the sidebar chat, Sal is right that there are competing models, especially for the flood, but I like the competing hypotheses. I think it helps us work towards the best possible model. Healthy debates, LOL. And I will give Standing for Truth this, and I will give creationists the credit for at least trying to try and figure out the natural model for the flood and all of that. I will give them credit for that and try and come up with hypotheses and predictions based upon the hypotheses. Though I think the biggest problem that I have with the flood being 4,500 years ago is, number one, there's not going to be enough time to recreate the biodiversity or the current human population. And number two, we have nucleansys dating that completely destroys accelerated nuclear decay, which completely destroys the flood model. But before we get to that, Leo, do you want to say anything about the faint young sun paradox? Because that's more of your special.
I don't know what the faint young sun paradox is. That's not something I've ever heard a professional talk about.
But yeah, faint young.
How about
Wait, is that the idea that the sun?
page?
Is that the idea that the
Jordan?
sun was way dimmer earlier in its
Yes.
life? Yeah, that is 100% not true. The sun was significantly more chaotic earlier in its life, and probably would have been slightly brighter, though not on a level that humans would have been capable of detecting.
Yeah. So basically, this from the I'm just reading from Wikipedia here. Apparent contradiction between the observation of liquid water early in Earth's history and the astrophysical expectation that the sun's output would be 70% as intense during that epoch as it is the current modern epoch. The paradox is that with the young sun's output at only 70% its current output, the early Earth would be expected to be completely frozen, but the early Earth seemed to have liquid water. So the issue was raised by astronomers Carl Sagan and George Mullen in 1972. Proposed resolutions has been taken about the greenhouse effects and planetary albedo. By the way, someone is echoing again, and I know it's not me because I'm the one that is talking.
I don't hear an echo.
I'm hearing an echo for some reason. Is anyone in the chat hearing an echo?
I'm not.
Okay, it's weird because I was hearing an echo, but maybe it stopped now.
Do you want me to continue? I'll try.
Yeah, sure, go right ahead.
Okay. Proposed resolutions of this paradox have taken into account greenhouse effects, changes to planetary albedo, astrophysical influences, or combinations of these suggestions. An unresolved question is how a climate suitable for life was maintained on Earth over the long time scale, despite the variable solar output and wide range of terrestrial conditions. And what I've just pointed out to, let's just assume that the Earth is old. What I pointed out to some of my evolution colleagues is that here again, if we had these rescue mechanisms, they had to be finely tuned. Again, evolution needs miracles to make the model work, and this is just one example of it. And I mean, this is, you know, you asked me what would change my mind. I said, well, there has to be something satisfying that would solve this problem. And by the way, I didn't answer your question yet. I think this has been a great discussion. I think while everyone's put really great things on the table, and maybe this isn't goodbye, maybe we can have another discussion later. I thought the stuff that David you put on Mars is very interesting and compelling.
So yeah, I just can't. What I think the thing that really compels me towards the scientific model is that, number one, there is no viable mechanism by which accelerated nuclear decay can speed up, and you and I seem to agree on that. And the mere consistencies throughout. And one of the problems that I have with the flood model, maybe you could try and answer this, is you have to get all the biodiversity that we have within 500 years or so, because we have pretty much all of the biodiversity being represented in art soon after the flood. Again, you gotta rebuild the population to have enough people to build the Tower of Babel and all the cities that were supposedly built shortly after the flood. Standing for Truth in his debate with Walker admitted that at the time of the Tower of Babel, 100 years or so after the flood, only at the maximum about 1,000 to 2,000 people. And actually, it's funny because Answers in Genesis admits during the flood, there were, at the Tower of Babel, there would be only about 400 people there, according to AIG's calculation.
Might I propose a slightly better problem, simply because I feel like with the biodiversity, a creationist are, well, God did it, because that seems to be their go-to explanation. And anything's possible when you have God magic. Anyway, I want an explanation for how all these civilizations that existed during when the flood was supposedly happen, why they didn't drown. unless one is proposing a localized flood rather than a global flood, because we know of numerous civilizations across the planet that have histories, well documented and well understood histories through 100 years before to 100 years after, all the way through the period when the flood supposedly happened. Were they oblivious to the fact that they were drowning? How do we explain that?
And also, again, this goes back to the thermonuclear stating I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but a global flood of that magnitude would have zeroed out the electrons in the thing. So we have the thermonuclear dating going back tens of thousands of years, well before the global flood. So these are the questions that I wrestled with as a Christian.
Another problem is the dendrochronology problem. We've done dendrochronology dating on trees that have existed, fossilized trees that existed pre-flood. And the thing with dendrochronology is, as I'm sure everybody here knows, it's looking at tree rings to figure out the age. We can also figure out stresses that trees would have been under based on how those tree rings grow. And something that we do not see in any of these from pre-flood are stresses related to essentially being submerged in water.
Yeah.
Why not?
And by the way, in relation to that, the oldest tree that still exists is well over 5,000 years old.
It's about 10,000 years old. And
Yeah,
it's still here.
Yep.
And it's not the kind of tree that could survive a global flood.
So thank you for those data points. These are things I've not personally explored very much. And you've definitely given me material that needs to be addressed. And as I said, this channel is organized for homeschool, partly for homeschool parents. And if they don't I'd rather that they face these questions here and think about it before sending their kids off. And they're going to face people just as smart. They're going to have, I just want to just point this out. Your kids go off to college, you're going to have smart guys like David, Neff, Leo, and Jordan as your kids' classmates. You need to equip them to be able to navigate that environment. Just saying, ignore what mainstream science says, and you're sending your kid to go off to medical school or to become a chemist or a physicist or an engineer, and they're going to have classmates like this. This is the environment you've got to prepare them for. And not that I have all the answers to the problems that were put here, but these are the things that need to be faced. And yes, at some level that maybe their faith will be strong enough to carry them. But I hope I've at least put some other viewpoints on the table for consideration. Faint young sum paradox being one of them. Some of the problems with the dating methods and maybe alternative models. So there are openings for change. But what I try to say is that I look at the biology problem, and I do think it is very serious against abiogenesis and evolution theory. So even independent of questions of Noah's flood, I personally think that the problems are, as one time I said, when I hear the problems with abiogenesis and then subsequently with evolution, I'd sooner believe in Noah's flood. And that's about the best answer I can give. But I think David and Leo and Jordan show the kind of students your kids are going to face. And, they have to learn to deal with it. And maybe sometimes the most honest thing to say is, we don't know, we have our beliefs, and that's totally honest. Don't give them junk. Please don't give them junk. That's just kind of there for popular consumption and trying to raise funds. Please don't give them junk. Level with them. Let them hear the problems that they're going to face.
Jordan, you had something you wanted to say?
I know you're trying to end it, so I won't take long. I just wanted to say that I really respect your willingness to say you don't know. It's something that not just creationists, but like people in general really have a problem admitting when they don't know something. And I think it's really a failing of our school system, I think, because children are constantly punished by some teachers when I don't know is the answer, when in fact, it's okay not to know something. that's not necessarily a state you want to stay in. Obviously, you have to have the answer to pass the test. But like, just taking I don't know as like a starting point. That's okay. And taking any answer is not a good way to get to truth. And if our goal is to get to truth, then we have to start by admitting the problem. So, yeah.
George Bond said, Sal, you admitted your own ignorance on their arguments. You need to educate yourself, brother. I'd like to invite George to, if he wishes to speak, he's welcome, and he can set me straight. I welcome the correction. I want to say this, rebuke a wise man and he'll love you. I love you, brother. So if you're more than welcome to join the stream, George Bond. And
I did do some searching on the paint.
We're talking in general about dating methods here, and that's just something I'm not familiar with. So, Leo, and I'd like to wrap this up. How long have we been going? About an hour, 30 minutes.
Yeah, an hour, 30
and
minutes.
This isn't a goodbye. We can regroup and talk again.
Oh, I would love to do this. Maybe we could do some of this a little bit more tomorrow if you guys are free.
But I just wanted to say to George Bond, he says, I don't debate. I know my limitations. Nobody's asking you to come in here and debate. I'm just asking you to come in here and make the corrections that you have levied.
Yeah, exactly. If you think everything we said was wrong, then come on in here and correct us. And saying for truth, if you're still here, why don't you come in also?
Also, I did some research on this faint young something. This is new to me. It's not something I've ever heard about. Not that it's not apparently an issue. I've never heard about this. I've done quite a bit of research in the field. Never heard about this. Anyway, here's an article from Science Magazine that talks about a potential way to measure a solution to this problem, whereby the sun would have actually not been that much dimmer early in its history because it eventually it ended up shedding mass, and that's it. Just you'd have to read the article. I'm not gonna.
I've heard that one too. So. Let's see, gentlemen, there's some outstanding issues here. You raised tree chronology, and David raised the issue of the thing on Mars. SFT said it may help to read some of our most recent YEC literature. That's fine. And it's really hard for me to say this, but when I investigate matters, I prefer reading mainstream, because if I can find things in the mainstream that support my point, it's like, okay, this is, and so, granted, the mainstream doesn't reflect my views, but like I cited, for example, today, the Robert Hazen book that talked about meteors having bacteria in them, or rocks, and I'm just like, this is
and
these data points really stand out to me. I'm just like, why is it there?
And there is of course a hypothesis that states that life originated actually in asteroids and rained down on Earth. It's an interesting hypothesis. I personally do not subscribe to it, but it's kind of interesting that there are space rocks that have.
Well, we're talking about Occam's razor. The problem that I have is every origins model is outrageous. People are trying to represent the creationist model as outrageous. But if we look at the origins model for the solar system, for example, all the fixes strike me as outrageous, like the origin of the moon. And then we have all these planetary things. I read the book, Evolution of the Solar System, and it was written actually to fight creationism. It's written by Stuart Ross Taylor. And I may cite the book here. And at the end of every chapter, it said, this is a severe problem in understanding the origin of planets, a severe unresolved problem. After I read the book, Evolution of the Solar System, it made me a creationist. I said, is the guy kidding? He couldn't have made a more strong argument for creationism.
Might I ask when that book was written? Do you know when that book was written?
About 30 years ago. So, and the problems that were articulated then have not gone away. They've gotten worse.
We've come significantly far, and I would argue there aren't any problems in understanding how our solar system formed other than things we just don't know. We've literally watched other solar systems form.
Yeah, and by the way,
exactly the same way we would expect.
I have to be I'm very skeptical of that. There are problems, very basic classical mechanics that don't agree, starting with angular momentum.
Relativity is what would be used, not necessarily classical mechanics.
Well, relativity is
No, it has to. But you know what? That is such a good topic. It is worth.
By the way, and if you're interested,
that's a good topic for another discussion.
Yeah,
but if people were asking why I started to become a creationist, that was the beginning of also contributed to me becoming a young Earth creationist. I read that book and I'm just like, oh my goodness, everything that they're saying in the classroom is kind of the popular version, but when we actually go to source papers, it's a different story. And I found that with both the Big Bang, solar system evolution, abiogenesis, and evolution. So there's this popular myth that is, and most recently, Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection. I mean, I just keep seeing all of this in the popular press. They say it's all solved, and then you actually go to the original materials that are in peer review, and if you dig hard enough, you'll see that they have problems. But Lee, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think this would be a good discussion.
But yeah,
we can go planet by planet. We can examine the magnetic fields and the various characteristics and the chemical evolution of these things. I'm going to just show the book that converted me to the idea that the solar system was created. The book is October 30th, 1992, Solar System Evolution. And I've not seen anything that has changed the fundamental problems that are there, starting with why Earth has a different chemistry than the other planets.
It doesn't. It's actually very, very similar to both Mars and Venus.
By the way,
I think we're trying to end, right? Like,
yeah, no, but hold on. Since we are trying to end, Sal, are you available tomorrow? I think it'll be a really fun time to kind of, if maybe same time tomorrow, go through some of the stuff in solar system planet formations. Me, you, and Leo, and Jordan, if you want to join us again.
Actually, actually, I should be restudying quantum mechanics and differential equations, and I appreciate the offer, and frankly, I couldn't do the topic justice. It's been so long since I've examined this. I've had to take 7 years off to do biology stuff, which is it's kind of been fun to visit the physics stuff, which is really my heart. That was most of my training in physics and engineering. I've had to do biology, but thank you for the offer. I don't think I could represent, just to be transparent, I don't think I could represent the creationist case and do it justice at this point. And
can I ask what the creationist model for how the solar system got here is? Is it God did some stuff and there it was? Or do they have an actual viable model that mechanistically explains how the planets would have developed like we do?
God did it miraculously. Okay, and I want to point out something. You raised something. And this deals with the scientific method. We tend to believe what we can control and replicate in the lab, or extend principles from what we replicate and control in the lab. If God created the universe with mechanisms outside of our ability to control and replicate, it's totally understandable that people won't believe it. See, I could flip a light switch and I can believe the mechanisms that turn it on and off. But the moment that we start invoking mechanisms that we can never replicate on demand or explain, which could be the case when God works miracles, I can understand that would be something that someone wouldn't believe. And that's just the decision everyone has to make, whether they're willing to accept an explanation that they'll never be able to understand, that's beyond their comprehension. So
can I ask one last question?
Yes, please.
If a mechanism cannot be verified, then to what degree should it even be considered? And why should it be considered?
When, as a matter of principle, natural mechanisms cannot explain it.
Well, then wouldn't it just remain unexplained? We can't explain it, therefore we can't explain it. It seems to me to be textbook argument from ignorance to say we can't explain it, therefore it is explained by this.
Well, we could call it, I wouldn't call it argument from ignorance. I call it proof by contradiction. This is the way that we were able to establish that the square root of 2 is irrational. It's actually hard to prove it directly. You have to assume that it's true and you find a contradiction. With respect to evolutionary mechanisms, we assume that the laws of physics allow these things to happen or even encouraged it. And when I look at the origin of life, chemical law actually contradicts ordinary processes. It's just like expecting a tornado to go through a junkyard and create a 747. There are things that are far from expectation. So the question that I pose to people, and everyone has to deal with this, and especially the Christians who've experienced personal miracles in their life or feel that they have, if Jesus came along and you're a blind beggar, as in the case of John 9, and you were healed, would you, and he tells you that he's the Messiah, would you follow him the rest of your life? I said yes. I was actually surprised that some people like Tracy Harris on the Atheist Experience said no, they wouldn't follow him the rest of her life. And I totally respected the fact she was honest and direct. She wouldn't follow. She would look for a naturalistic explanation. So, it's everyone's life to decide how they want to spend it. And yes, I would follow something I could not prove and explain like a little child. David?
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Definitely. I really want to thank all three of you for the cordial and respectful dialogue that we had tonight. I've had a really good time. And it looks like John is wanting to set up, John Logical Plausible Probable is going to set up a open mic on his channel in a few minutes. So I
yes, LPP, thank you.
Yeah, so I might
head over there and
yeah, Jordan, just curious, what do you guys want to do? Just have a little bit of a chat on my channel for a little bit after this.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk
I'm
about
okay with that.
For a very little bit.
Okay, sure.
Jordan, thank you. And I do want to say something about. Sorry. Tell me about what you heard about the second law. I need to set something straight.
Oh, man.
Was that in one of your debates? I just need. That's just getting under my skin.
So it was the debate with Nephilim Free pretty recently. He was saying that the formation of galaxies, basically the formation of life in general, violates the second law because all things decay and go towards disorder. So what I was trying to communicate is those are very imprecise terms. That the complexity does not equal entropy, and entropy always increases. But it's not the case that, and I think the example that I used was that you can have local decreases in entropy with the whole system still increasing. And so the example I used was ice freezes. If water freezes, that's a lowering in entropy, but the whole system is increased entropy. And that, I don't think that point ever really.
I just want to say really quickly, there is a lot of straw manning of my positions going on in the side chat. It's like these people have never had a conversation with me. Oh, that's right.
Maybe you can settle it in the logical probables.
Go ahead.
Anyway, yeah.
Okay. So, Jordan, and I took a lot of flack from creationists. It's like, guys, please stop saying stuff. If you cannot calculate entropy in sophomore chemistry, please stop using the arguments because, all right, a sophomore in chemistry will call you out on it. You take the standard molar entropy here, and everyone's supposed to do this. You could see it. I have examples of college chemistry tests, and you're supposed to just figure out how much entropy something has just by the amounts. It's very simple. What has more entropy, a warm living adult human or a frozen dead rat? Answer: the warm living human has way more entropy than a frozen dead rat. And what you should challenge someone who starts using these arguments, and I challenged a fellow ID proponent and he punted. I said, okay, so someone dies, give me the delta S, which is the change in entropy from the living to the dead state. He said, I can't do it. I said, that's a problem. If you're claiming this, you ought to be able to calculate or give an estimate of why and justify why the delta S has gone up when he dies. And so I said, let's just take the frozen dead rat. You take the amount of water in a human and you take the amount of water in a rat. Just calculate the number of moles. And then you take the standard entropy tables. I think I could find it here. Properties of water.
Yeah.
and it has a standard molar entropy. Yep, here it is. You just take the standard molar entropy. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. Standard molar entropy. There's one where it's in the frozen state and the liquid state.
Joules per mole Kelvin. Okay.
Right. And you just figure out how many moles of water in the human, make a good estimate, figure out how many moles in that rat, in that poor rat. You could use the frozen state for the rat and the liquid state for the human. You'll come up with a substantial amount of entropy in the human. And if anyone says entropy prevents, second law prevents the formation of life, I can actually cite 3 creationists who say that's not true.
Just do the math. It's a mathematical law.
It's right there. So
Yeah, exactly.
Like you would convince me if you showed me mathematically that this process violates the second law with math, and you could like rigorously prove it, I'd be convinced. But
Same here.
but
That's
like
a hard charge. Creationists aren't, with the exception of Sal, he's probably, honestly, the only one I've met. Other than him, creationists aren't very good at math.
well,
Yeah.
I don't want to get into
Or
swinging
science.
mud.
we don't have, well, thank you for the offhanded compliment. It does sort of say
Yeah.
sad
For me,
things
it's
about
not
my
swinging
colleagues.
mud,
And
it's just the
I don't
truth
approve of that,
observations.
although I do like to think I'm a cut above, but I
by
don't
the
know
way-
if some people.
I mean,
By
just
the
think
way,
that,
Sal,
but-
LPP wants you to make him a mod so he can post a link to his after show in the YouTube.
Oh
YouTube
yes, let me
live
make
chat.
you. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
And I'm
LPP.
also doing a little bit of a chat on my channel. So Leo and Jordan, I know you guys
let
want
me
to come
see.
over.
Okay.
I think
LPP.
Leo
I'm
and
having a problem. Yeah.
I think Leo, I think it'll be a fun topic to talk about, like the formation of the solar system and all that on my channel. So if you want to hear something like that about that, come over to my channel if you
and
want to.
Sal, if you ever find yourself in Richmond, man, let me know. We can get a beer. That'd be
Thank you. In fact, if we end up in a casino and they don't throw me out, I'll get you one. I'll comp you one. Logical, probable, plausible. I'm trying to get your link there. I'm going to try to make you a mod. So Jordan, if you had anything to say, you can buy me a little time here while I try to square away and make logical, plausible, probable a mod.
I
Yeah.
like conversations like this. Like conversations like this would have helped me a lot when I was a young Earth creationist. Getting out of your echo chamber, engaging with the other side. The question I wish I could pose to myself when I was, a young Earth creationist, and I'd pose to anyone, including an atheist, or like basically challenge your assumptions. If you're a young Earth creationist, would you be a young Earth creationist if it weren't for the Bible? Like if this basically just look at the evidence and come with the simplest model, and that should lead us to the truth. And if that simplest model is in fact young Earth creationism, then awesome, cool.
Yep, I really love that question.
And if it's not, then it's not. I don't think that anyone thinks that young Earth creationism is like the basis of their faith, or at least I don't think most people do.
Yeah.
So
Speaking of questions, we never got to yours, David.
Oh yeah. What evidence would compel you to change your mind? So, I guess I'll start first. As far as radiometric dating concerned, you could show that the foundational assumptions of radiometric dating, such as the constancy, the decay constant would be radically different. I think that would be compelling evidence to show that radiometric dating is not viable. As far as Noah's flood, young Earth creationism, pretty easy. Find a fossil rabbit in the Precambrian and claim your Nobel Prize. There's a reason why we don't find humans older than 500,000 years. We don't find any. We find if you find a fossil that is out of place, then claim your Nobel Prize, and you definitely won the and you would easily convert me to Christianity or whatever religion you want. But anyway,
Yes.
Leo, you're next.
So what would convince me of the creationist well, it's not really a model because they don't actually have anything that explains anything. So what would convince me is a body of objectively verifiable data that concords exclusively with or is positively indicative of their assertions.
Yeah, I like that also. I like that definition.
I'm not going to try to get into specifics because it's not my job to get into specifics. It's their job to find those specifics and present them and overturn the whole of modern biology, physics, chemistry, genetics, medicine, immunology, geology, and pretty much every relevant physical scientific field. I don't think anybody's up to the task.
Yeah, definitely. And
but it's all a conspiracy to hate God or something like that.
Yep.
And Jordan?
What would change my mind? Well, I mean, evidence. Like, that's what changed my mind away from it. I was a young Earth creationist, and I was handed a book that made me ask questions, and the evidence seems to indicate that the Earth is much, much older than 4,500 years old. So, I mean, it's a kind of a flippant answer. What would change my mind to evidence? It's not really an answer, but I would just need a consistent model that adequately explained all of the evidence to at least as good a degree as the common secular model does. And if it did that, then I would be open to being I am open to being persuaded. I think that kind of thing would persuade me.
Definitely. Persuade me. Just give me something that's actually persuasive. Substantive. I need substance.
Now, I actually didn't have a good answer to the question I posed, what would change my mind. There are two things. As I thought about it, I needed time to think about it. The first is, if the origin of life were proven that it could arise naturally, I think everything would be moot for me, meaning, so what if the Earth is old or young? If life can arise naturally, that's one miracle that I've hung my hat on. And the second thing that would persuade me is on Judgment Day, and the Lord said to me, "Hey, you know what? Hugh Ross was right." So that would change my mind. So, gentlemen, it's been delightful. And Leo, I hope you will come to my quantum mechanics differential equations talk.
When is that?
David, I'm sorry?
When are you hosting that?
I haven't decided. I'll let you know. And if you can come and you can't, I totally respect that.
Yeah,
it's still
just
something
shoot
I want
me
to
an
do.
email. Just shoot me an email on the day and time. I'll probably be there.
And David, I want to talk to you about molecular phylogeny.
Oh, that would be phenomenal. I would love that.
And I'm gonna try to get Erica and Speed of Sound, because I actually do work in that. And Jordan, oh my goodness, we'll have that beer in Richmond when the lockdowns are and I can get out of the house.
By the way, Sal, if you don't mind me, since you said you went to Johns Hopkins, are you still in Maryland by any chance?
I'm actually in Virginia. I used to commute 90 minutes to Johns Hopkins, and I went to a satellite campus that made it a little easier, called the Dorsey Center. So, the Applied Physics Lab, and the Applied Physics Lab is kind of south of that. So, it's really hard for me to get out of the house because I'm caring for my mother right now.
Yeah,
and she doesn't like having healthcare and senior care workers come in. So, I'm kind of stuck for now. I'd like to thank, before I say goodbye, and I'd really like to thank everyone who has joined the chat and come to this. And I know
got 21 watching. Well, it just dropped to 19, but you had a fair amount watching the whole time. That's good.
I'm sure I've offended a fair number of people on both sides, and I have a way of doing that. And I'm going to continue to offend people. And Sal, I'm realizing I need to speak my conscience at some point.
Yeah, and Sal, once again, I really appreciate your honesty on this issue and your openness. I think you're probably the most honest creationist I've ever came across.
Ditto.
And so I do appreciate you listening to your arguments with objective view and saying, look, these arguments do not work, stop using them. I greatly respect you for that. Leo and Jordan, I put a link to my StreamYard and the private chat, so feel free to make your way over to my channel as well. Kind of going back between me and John. We're just gonna have some fun tonight. Once again, this was done when it's short notice. I emailed him at 8:15. Hey, do you want to have a discussion on some topics? And he said sure. So that's how.
You emailed who?
I emailed Sal.
Okay.
So thank you, David, for being my co-host and bailing me out. And when I needed to have time to Google, and it's been a lot of fun. And God willing, I'll have the chance to have the quantum mechanics discussion and then the molecular phylogeny discussion. And feel free to invite your friends. So take care, everyone. And to the people in the chat, Feel free to head to all the after shows after here. I may visit Logical, Probable, Plausible, and just express my thanks. So take care, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right.